last week? Did anyone go on to see it? And it's okay? It turned out okay? Let me ask you this. When you went in, you saw it didn't come up with 5 segments. It just came up with 1, or did it say that there were 5 segments after it?
I got through 2, but it's
It did say it had 5 parts. Okay, great. That's exactly it, and I don't know why it does that, but 13 minutes and 50, yeah. And then one of them, I guess and I don't know if this class or my intro next, I forgot to turn it off, so it has everybody up in the front telling me why they were late or whatever, but okay, well, good, as long as it goes on. Okay, what we're gonna do today then, first 25% of the course is theory, people. So we introduced teleological reasoning and deontological reasoning. Last week we went through hedonism. I introduced you to Epicurus and how Epicurus thinks that hedonism or pleasure is really based upon avoiding pain and displeasure and living a moderate life when it comes to the pleasures of life. In other words, we don't get too deep into pleasure because those things might handicap us in one way or another. We talked about John Stuart Mill, who thinks pleasure is our sovereign master. Don't be sad, be happy. Any physical or intellectual pleasure that makes you happy is a desirable pleasure. We talked about the experience machine. If I could put you in a machine and you could only get anything you wanted and never have to get anything you don't want, how many of you want to be hooked up to it? Would that make you happy? And finally, the balance in the act was Jean Cazot's, that yeah, happiness is important, but so is autonomy, the ability to make your own decisions, morality that comes along with it, feeling like you make progress. So that was our introduction to hedonism. What we're really talking about today is something called normative ethics. Normative ethics is that area of moral philosophy that tries to identify the fundamental principles or values of morality. Though there are many moral rules, philosophers have long sought to try to unify them by reference to one ultimate moral standard. Normative ethics investigates whether this is possible, and if so, tries to identify the basic moral rules that will do the needed unifying work. So we started the semester with a box. It was bounded by rules that were grounded in values. All these values we're going to go through this semester. We went through hedonism last week. We're going to go through moral virtue today. On Wednesday, we're going to go through moral duty. Duty. We're going to discuss social contract when we get to go welfare and social justice. Virtue ethics is tied very closely to feminist ethics. We're going to go through all of these values and see which ones apply and which ones don't. As far as I know, there's no universal value. There's no one value. Thou shalt not kill. Every major religion, every major society adopts that rule. But I have a right to defend myself, even under certain conditions with lethal force. A country's attacked, you have a right to defend yourself. In both those situations, someone's probably going to die. In some cultures, if someone kills someone in your family, you have a moral obligation to kill someone in their family. It's called revenge killing. And if you don't do it, you're looked down upon as not being moral. So we have the basic principle, you shouldn't kill. It's everywhere. But when we apply it, and this is applied ethics now, although the first quarter of the course is going to be theory, we need a framework to decide how do we fit all these different values in there. Hedonism says if it makes you happy, do it. Well, there are some rules that will make me happy that will make other people extremely unhappy. You can't incorporate slavery. As we get more and more older people, we can't just decide, well, you've lived long enough, we're just going to go ahead and get rid of you, because we don't have enough natural resources. Look, we're so far in the tank right now. Arizona was the first state. I don't know if another state did this. If you were on welfare and you needed an organ transplant, they said you need to find another state. We're broke. Every dollar the government gets, as far as I know, 40 cents goes immediately towards interest. We're in the tank, people. And so we may get to a place where you go to Publix and buy food and don't pay for it and tell me what they say to you. We've been living on future deductions for who knows how long we've been doing this. There was a time this country was not in debt, and now we're just in incredible debt. So maybe we get to some point where it makes more people happy if we get rid of old people. They've lived a long time. You're 90, 95. I have a friend of mine who works in the equivalent of a Ronald McDonald House, but it's a private hospital. She says, you wouldn't believe how many 90-year-olds come here, get double, triple, quadruple bypass surgery. They go home. They're fine. 2 months later, they die. Why do they die? It's called old age. $3 trillion on health care in this country. Half of it, $1.5 trillion, buys people, young and old, 6 more months of life, and then we're done. 80% of it, 2.4 trillion, buys 2 extra months of life. That's it. Is that worth $2.4 trillion? Well, you know, some people say, well, of course it is. You can't deny people medical care, and we have laws that do that. They require hospitals to give you what's called ordinary care. While some of us still don't have health insurance, you have a health plan. It's called the emergency room. They are required to deal with you and give you what we call ordinary treatment, not extraordinary treatment. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. So hedonism is a value. And by the way, when we say normative, normative is norm, and norm equals value. So if you see the word normative on your exam or on your quiz, it's referring to values. And the values we're referring to are these values right here. What values help us set up our rules? So hedonism, there are rules that apply hedonistic principles. There are rules that apply moral virtue, moral duty, social contract. All of these, there's a place for them in the system. Everybody with me? So far, there's no unifying principle. There may be a unifying principle. We find a few, like I said, thou shalt not kill, and that is universal, except there's times when we don't apply it. There was a time in World War II when we had another axis of evil. We had the Japanese, the Germans, we had the Italians. A lot of people forget about the Italians. If you were German, Japanese, or Italian descent, you would be put in, not internment camps, concentration camps, but internment camps. We took away your ability to move around the country. Very limited. And then when the war was over, we freed the Japanese, we freed the Italians, and we kept the Germans for another 2 years. Why would we do that? Well, after we saw what the Nazis did in Germany, we weren't sure what this American neo-Nazi party was all about. And so their freedoms, libertarian society, their freedoms were limited for an extra period of time till we figured out what to do with them. Greatest happiness for the greatest number. So we're still looking for this universal principle. I would suggest to you it doesn't exist except in theory. But when it comes to application, we live more of a practical life. Nevertheless, all of these values come into play, in our system anyway. And we're going to discuss these values in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll move out of theory. Probably the hardest part of this course is going to be the quizzes that have to do with theory. Anybody find a little difficult this last quiz you took? It's a little difficult. Yeah, and they won't get easier until I get out of theory. If you get it real easy, fine. If you don't, then just be prepared for it. When we get into the practical aspect of different kinds of things, we're going to deal with capital punishment, abortion, embryonic stem cell research, euthanasia, social justice. It should be a little bit easier for you. So any questions for me regarding that then? Okay. So you can read the rest of this. It's just a general picture. Normative ethics has certain central questions. What moral principles should we accept? Not all moral principles are equal. We do pick and choose. What makes right actions right? How do we decide what's right and what's wrong? And I'm not tilting the scale. I don't mean it that way. Right now in this country, after 1973 in Roe versus Wade, a woman has a perfect right to terminate her pregnancy anytime she wants. If you're in a car accident with a pregnant woman and you're at fault, you can be charged with a double homicide. It's the law. So how do we judge principles? How do we judge actions? What makes an action right? What makes an action wrong? Did I talk to you about I had a young lady in class when I was teaching night classes about maybe 8 years ago. She left class, it was 9:30 at night, and she accidentally hit a lady and killed her. The officer said he wasn't going to charge her with a crime. It was an unintentional homicide. Other times you hit people, yeah, you can be charged with homicide. And is there a single fundamental principle of morality? We just talked about that. So this is what we'll be going through for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Utilitarianism. Kantianism is rationality and human dignity. Social contract theories, voluntary agreements we choose to make with one another. Natural law theories like human nature. Prima facie duties, a plurality of moral rules. What are our basic obligations we have to one another? And feminist ethics about power and oppression. So that's going to be the kind of framework that we're going to use for the next 3 weeks or so. Okay. Now to get into the lecture today, how many of you have seen the movie with Gerard Butler, The 300? Okay, good. The rest of you that didn't, I'm going to have to make some explanation to you then. The movie 300 is about Greek soldiers, 300 of them. We're fending off an invasion by Xerxes, the Persian king. maybe 1 million soldiers. I mean, that guy controlled a lot of territory and had a lot of people that were subject to his rule. You want to live? Fine, you'll fight for me. If you make it through the fight, you'll live for another day, but you're going to fight for me. These 300 men met Xerxes at Thermopylae, this little kind of isthmus piece of land. And for 3 days, they killed 10,000 Persian soldiers, the best and the worst, the Medes, who were just kind of cannon fodder, and then this special group of soldiers. And they made them pay such a price that Xerxes had to think about invading Greece until later on when he came in, he ran it over. Now, the point of that is this. Greek culture, I'd include Japanese culture. There's a lot of cultures in the world I would call homogeneous. They're built into each other. We're a pluralistic society. We have people from cultures all over the place. We bring all these different values. We try and homogenize them. Some cultures are indigenous to themselves. There's no outside influence. They're who they are. The Greeks are one of those. Japanese, like that. There'll be some other Asian societies, very indigenous to one another, to themselves. It's all, I'm not talking about sleeping with your mother and father. I'm talking about keeping the culture pure on the inside. Okay. What turns out in Grecian life, if you were born into the city of Sparta, you would be a soldier. That was your job. If you were a Spartan woman and you gave birth to a male child, you knew right away that as soon as that child was born, that male child would be examined. I don't know how they picked examiners. They were all men. It's a paternalistic society, male-ruled. You would have to surrender your infant to this person, and they would examine this infant for any physical defect. If any physical defect was found, the infant was left out to nature to die. It's called infanticide. Because Greece had made a commitment, and Sparta had made a commitment that they were going to produce the best soldiers that they could possibly produce. Now, the other city-states had soldiers too, but the Spartans, they were just adamant about it. As soon as that child quit suckling in his mother's breast, it'd start to learn. It would learn culture, it would learn music, it would learn art. Have you ever seen The Last Samurai? And you see this in other ones too. Just before battle, and I forget the name of the fellow, Oshi in Ronin 47, and they're preparing for battle, and the fellow who's the trainer of all the troops, you would think he's out there with his swordsman. No, he's out there with a fan, and he's doing what we call kata. He's practicing his art. He'll let his instincts take over in battle, but he's practicing it's a form, a kata, and he's practicing his art. And so from the earliest stages as a young Grecian boy, you would learn your art, but it included art, music, literature, physical training. I mean, disruptive physical training, outside in freezing cold. You would learn to endure, because frankly, in battle, if you can't endure to the end, you don't succeed. And so this was the lot of every Spartan soldier. Every young man born in Sparta would learn to become. Now, they weren't all equal, but they were the best they could be. Everybody with me on that? Okay, and they made the Persians pay for their stupidity. 300 men, 10,000 soldiers killed. Okay. Now, if you didn't qualify, you were excluded. It's very important to see that. In fact, if you watch the movie, right, when they come to the isthmus and they're getting ready, there's one fella shows up. Now they have this incredible. I didn't realize that. I just saw this yesterday. I was looking on they had these 3-foot in diameter bronze shields, probably about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick, 3 feet. And inside, I didn't realize this, they had like a round block of wood, like an oak or maple. I mean, these things must have been hefty. These